Did Nate Tibbetts just admit to orchestrating the biggest tampering scandal in WNBA history? When the Phoenix Mercury head coach casually dropped a bombshell about recruiting Dianna Bonner during a post-game interview, he didn't just reveal a secret. He exposed a multi-year scheme that turned the Indiana Fever into collateral damage. This isn't speculation anymore. This is their own coach saying the quiet part out loud, and what he admitted could change everything we thought we knew about how WNBA free agency really works. Before we dive into the evidence that has the entire league talking, make sure you smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon, because we're about to break down the most controversial story of the 2025 season. Drop a comment below and tell us if you think Phoenix should face consequences for what happened. Now let's get into why Fever fans are calling this the most blatant case of tampering the WNBA has ever seen. The whole situation started back when Indiana thought they were building something special. The Fever's front office believed they had pulled off the perfect signing. Dianna Bonner, a multiple-time champion with championship DNA, was supposed to be the veteran presence that would guide Caitlin Clark through her sophomore season and help Aliyah Boston continue her development into an elite center. When the ink dried on that contract, everyone in Indianapolis was celebrating. Sports analysts praised the move. Local media called it the missing piece. The narrative was simple. Bonner would bring championship experience to a young core that had struggled with consistency during Clark's rookie campaign. The preseason buzz was electric. Reporters wrote about how Bonner's leadership would fast-track the team's chemistry. Fans imagined her mentoring Clark, teaching her the subtle tricks that separate good players from great ones. For a franchise that had endured years of losing and finally had a generational talent in Clark, adding a proven winner seemed like the logical next step. The Fever were supposed to transform from a promising young team into legitimate playoff contenders. Bonner was marketed as the steady hand on the wheel, the player who had seen it all and could keep everyone calm when the pressure mounted. But that optimism evaporated faster than anyone could have predicted. Just 9 games into the season, everything fell apart. Bonner demanded a trade. When that didn't materialize quickly enough, she got waived entirely. The turnaround was so abrupt that even people inside the organization seemed blindsided. The official statements talked about fit issues, claiming her style didn't mesh with Indiana's up-tempo offense or Clark's pace-heavy approach. They said the chemistry just wasn't there. But if you were paying attention, none of that added up. 9 games isn't enough time to determine fit, especially for a veteran of Bonner's caliber. Something else was going on, and Fever fans knew it. Social media exploded with accusations. This wasn't about basketball compatibility. This was about betrayal. Fans started connecting dots that the mainstream media refused to acknowledge. They pointed out how Bonner barely engaged with teammates during timeouts, how her body language on the bench looked distant, almost detached, how she took a mysterious personal leave that was never fully explained. Every detail started to look suspicious in hindsight. People weren't buying the official narrative anymore. They were calling it a setup, saying Bonner used the Fever to collect a maximum contract, keep her name in the headlines, and position herself for a return to Phoenix that had been planned all along. What made the situation even more suspicious was Bonner's complete silence. Her only public statement was brief and carefully worded. Despite our shared goals and excitement heading into the season, I felt the fit did not work out, and I appreciate the organization's willingness to grant my request to move on, particularly at this point in my career. That was it. No heartfelt goodbye to teammates. No video tribute thanking the fans who had welcomed her. No social media posts acknowledging the organization that had just given her a maximum contract. For someone who had been marketed as a mentor and leader, her exit felt cold and rehearsed, like she was reading from a script written by lawyers. But what happened next would shock everyone and validate every conspiracy theory Fever fans had been pushing. A clip surfaced that changed the entire narrative. It wasn't leaked footage from a secret meeting or an anonymous source dropping hints. It was Phoenix Mercury head coach Nate Tibbetts, on camera, casually admitting to a multi-year pursuit of Bonner that stretched back to when she was still under contract with other teams. The clip was short, just a few seconds of post-game chatter, but those seconds carried enough weight to flip the entire story on its head. With a grin on his face, Tibbetts said something that made jaws drop across the league. "Luckily, the last 2 off-seasons, we've tried to get DB to come back to Phoenix. Unfortunately, she didn't pick us twice. 3rd time is a charm. I think AT helped in that a little bit." That last line, the casual mention of AT, which everyone knew meant Alyssa Thomas, Bonner's partner, was the smoking gun. This wasn't rumor anymore. This wasn't speculation from angry fans. This was their own coach, on camera, describing exactly what Fever supporters had been warning about. A pre-planned recruitment that stretched across multiple seasons, involving players who had no business being part of those conversations. Every phrase in that clip sounded casual enough for a locker room conversation, but together they mapped out a timeline that looked an awful lot like tampering. When Tibbetts said, "the last 2 off-seasons," he was admitting contact or intent during periods when Bonner was contractually tied to other teams. First with Connecticut, then with Indiana. The WNBA's collective bargaining agreement doesn't leave room for that kind of wiggle space. Unauthorized talks, back-channeling, or agreements made outside of official free agency windows are explicitly banned. The rules exist specifically to prevent exactly this kind of situation, where a player signs with one team while already having a handshake deal with another. The way Tibbetts said it made everything worse. There was no hesitation, no moment where media training kicked in and made him reconsider his words. Just a man beaming about finally closing a deal that had been years in the making. The people in the stadium laughed, treating it like a fun anecdote about persistence paying off. But outside that arena, Fever fans weren't laughing. They were furious. Someone clipped the footage, stripped away the surrounding context, and labeled it the WNBA's first public tampering confession. Within hours, it spread from fan accounts to highlight pages to national sports talk shows. The phrase "Phoenix receipt" started trending because that's exactly what it was. A public record of what was supposed to stay behind closed doors. The mention of Alyssa Thomas added another layer to the scandal. Everyone in WNBA circles knew she and Bonner were engaged. But when Tibbetts said, "I think 8 helped in that a little bit," with that knowing wink in his voice, the subtext became impossible to ignore. If Thomas, a star player herself, played any role in convincing Bonner to leave Indiana, that crosses a line between personal support and professional ethics. It's one thing to support your partner's career decisions. It's completely different if that support involves facilitating contact between teams that shouldn't be communicating during restricted periods. That gray area is exactly what tampering laws are designed to prevent. Even neutral analysts who normally avoid controversy could see how bad this looked. When a head coach openly ties his acquisition to involvement from a player on another roster, you're not dealing with speculation anymore. You're dealing with confirmation. Under the WNBA's rulebook, those kinds of unauthorized interactions can trigger investigations, fines, and even loss of draft picks. But here's where it gets really interesting. As of now, in late 2025, the league office has remained completely silent on the matter. No investigation has been announced. No statement about reviewing the comments. Nothing. That silence is deafening, and it's making a lot of people question whether the WNBA actually cares about enforcing its own rules. Let's talk about what this means for the Indiana Fever and their fans. This organization gave Bonner a maximum contract in good faith. They restructured their roster to accommodate her. They promoted her as a cornerstone piece for their young core. Caitlin Clark, who has been dealing with her own challenges this season, including a recent injury that kept her out of several games, was supposed to benefit from Bonner's championship experience. Aliyah Boston was supposed to learn from her veteran presence. Sophie Cunningham, who joined the Fever this season after leaving Phoenix, was supposed to have another experienced player alongside her. Instead, they got 9 games of mediocre production and a player who seemed checked out from day one. The financial implications are staggering too. Indiana is still paying a portion of Bonner's contract, even though she's now in Phoenix. That's money that could have been used to sign other players or extend existing contracts. That's roster flexibility that just vanished because a player and another organization allegedly had a plan in place before the ink even dried on the Indiana deal. If the league doesn't investigate this, what message does that send? That teams can tamper as long as they're not too obvious about it? That players can sign contracts with no intention of honoring them as long as they manufacture a reason to leave? The timing of everything makes it even more suspicious. Bonner's brief stint with Indiana coincided with Phoenix working out their salary cap situation. Early in the 2025 season, Mercury management admitted they didn't have the financial flexibility to offer Bonner what she wanted, but they knew Indiana did. So what does a player do in that situation if there's already a handshake agreement in place? You sign the maximum deal with the team that can afford it, play just enough games to avoid obvious contract violation, then force your way out and join the team you wanted all along for whatever money they can scrape together. It's not illegal if you can't prove intent, but it's definitely unethical. Fever fans have every right to feel betrayed. They welcomed Bonner with open arms. They bought her jersey. They defended her when her production didn't match expectations. They believed the narrative that she was there to help build something special. And in return, they got used as a stepping stone. The worst part is how avoidable this was. If Phoenix had just waited until they had the cap space, if Bonner had been honest about her intentions, if the league had mechanisms to prevent this kind of manipulation, none of this would have happened. But instead, we're left with a situation that exposes the darker side of WNBA free agency. Before we wrap this up, let's address the elephant in the room. Why hasn't the WNBA done anything about this? Tibbetts made his comments months ago, and there's been zero official response. No investigation announcement, no statement about reviewing the situation, nothing. The silence suggests either the league doesn't think it's a big deal, or they're worried about what an investigation might uncover. Because if they start digging into the Phoenix-Bonner situation, who knows what other similar arrangements they might find? This could be just the tip of the iceberg, and the league might prefer to let sleeping dogs lie rather than open a can of worms that exposes systemic problems with how free agency actually works behind the scenes. The broader implications go beyond just Indiana and Phoenix. If teams can tamper without consequences, if players can sign contracts with no intention of honoring them, if coaches can admit to recruiting players under contract elsewhere without facing penalties, then what's the point of having rules at all? The WNBA is trying to grow, trying to increase viewership and revenue, trying to establish itself as a premier professional league. But situations like this undermine that credibility. Fans invest emotionally and financially in their teams. When they feel like the system is rigged, when they see blatant rule violations go unpunished, they lose faith in the league's integrity. So where does this leave us as we head toward 2026? Dianna Bonner is in Phoenix, exactly where she apparently wanted to be all along. The Mercury got their player without facing any consequences for how they got her. Indiana is left picking up the pieces, still paying money to a player who's helping their conference rival, still dealing with the roster disruption her brief tenure caused. And the fans who feel scammed have no recourse except to voice their frustration on social media and hope someone in the league office is actually listening. If you think the WNBA needs to investigate what happened between Phoenix and Dianna Bonner, drop a comment below and let us know. Should teams face penalties for tampering? Should players who bail on contracts after 9 games face consequences? And most importantly, should Nate Tibbetts face discipline for openly admitting to a multi-year recruitment of a player under contract elsewhere? This story isn't over, and your voice matters. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because we'll be following every development in this saga. Hit that like button if you want to see the WNBA actually enforce its own rules, and we'll see you in the next one.